Hey guys, it's Wes with Their Concepts. Today we're going to have episode 3 of our 2wd Drive Outdoor Buggy series. Today we're going to talk about setup recommendations and overall guidelines for running your buggy on low grip dirt. So the first topic we're going to cover, and arguably probably the most important topic, is your weight bias of your buggy. So naturally, when you're on a lower grip racing surface, you need to have more of a rear biased weight bias. So let's take a look at the first things you can do. Well, first and foremost, that's pretty glaring. As you can see, the wheelbase is pretty short on this buggy. So I am running the 4mm short chassis for the Wheelbase MSV1, as well as I made some other modifications to get the wheelbase even shorter. So what I ended up doing is I shimmed the top shock standoffs 6mm forward, as well as I shimmed the rear arms and dremelled them to get them 7mm further forward. So what does that do? It basically will get more of that weight centered over the rear tire. In addition to that, I also adjusted the rear hubs to be all the way forward as well. So in total, it is between 10 and 11 millimeters shorter than like a kit setting, for example. So overall, this has a very, very big impact on the handling and rear traction of the buggy. In addition to that, there's a few other things. So obviously you don't want to run any front weight on it. In my opinion, that also includes the front wing. However, I think that is totally dependent on how much steering and the type of track. If it's like a flowy track, then you might want to run a front wing at the detriment of rear traction. I've also installed, if you can see them here, these are made by Mod, and they are 10-gram brass diff inserts that adjust your diff height. I've also removed the waterfall brace, and I put a little shim in there just so I can tighten down the transmission nice and tight. I have the Wheelbase Europe carbon fiber battery mount, which gives me a little bit more adjustments, and I can actually shift after I remove the waterfall brace, it allows you to shift the weight bias of the battery as far back as possible. The last thing I did here is I used a carbon fiber electronics mounting plate, as well as mounted the electronics as far back to the rear on the plate as possible to try to get as much of that weight to the rear tires. So the next topic we're going to talk about is the aerodynamics of the MSV1 2wd Drive buggy. So as you can see, the body that I currently rock right now, which is actually the preferred body for low grip applications, and that is the J Concepts B2. And you can see how it has the scoops here on the side planes, as well as the front body is kind of a scoop, and it has scoops behind the central fin, and then obviously the pronounced central fin that runs all the way down. This really helps with stability, especially when you have large jumps or if it's windy. Really just for outdoor conditions, I think this is definitely the preferred option, which is why we saw, the top 10 at the Diff Worlds running this particular body. So in addition to that, J Concepts also has a few other bodies, and these you would probably step down one at a time, depending on how much rotation you're looking for with the buggy. If it's like a short track with tight turns, then I can see you wanting to step down to one of these bodies. This really depends on the layout. So we have the kit body from Yugo, which is kind of a blend between the P2 and the F2. And then you have the F2, which is awesome on carpet. I can see you potentially using this as well on low grip dirt if, like I said, it was a very tight course with a lot of 180s and you need more rotation, then maybe you would run this body. So anyway, outside of that, there's also wings. So J Concepts has a litany of different wings available for 2wd Drive buggies, but for outdoor use, what I would actually recommend is the 7-inch J Concepts Monster Wing, which I actually covered in my previous video. So check that one out if you want to see more on that wing. So as far as the wing setup, I like to run my wing all the way up, and that helps with raising the center of gravity, and you get more roll out of the rear, as well as it kind of gets that wing out of some of the dirty, turbulent air created by the front shock tower. In addition to that, I also want to run the maximum wing angle, which is 6 degrees. And then I also shim my wing up 4 millimeters, so that way it gets completely above that rear tower, So it's getting the full effect of the scoops on the wing. I had already touched on the front shock tower, and I think a lot of that's personal preference. As you add front downforce, it's going to take away rear traction and rear downforce. So something to keep in mind, when the track's really low grip, you probably don't want to run a front wing. If you're looking for more steering on like a flowy track, then yes, you can run a front wing, and it could be beneficial for you. All right, rolling right into the center of gravity discussion. So there's a few different things that you can do to raise the center of gravity. I've already talked about the rear wing height. You'd want to consider your ride height. So the general operating range, I think, for low grip applications is, and this is not 100%, but it's usually between 18 to 22 millimeters. I found I typically like to run about 20 millimeters because that way I can get my rear bones level with my rear hubs and front hubs all the way down, as well as the diff height all the way down, which, moving on to that, for low grip applications, you always want to run your hubs all the way down. So both front and rear. As you can see in the front, these are shimmed all the way down, the front hubs. And in the rear, it's kind of hard to see it, but it is the same story. So even you can see the rear diff is also all the way down. And essentially what that allows you to do is at 20 millimeter ride height, it gets my bones nice and level, so that way I don't get any rotational forces that are going to want to make the buggy step out. So it allows you to get all of the rotational force straight forward and down. So that's kind of what you're looking for. All right, the next topic we're going to cover is shock packages. So it goes without saying, if you're going to run them outside on a natural dirt surface, you want a very soft shock package to generate mechanical traction. So it is a fine balance though. Too soft of a shock package can actually create unwanted weight transfer, which usually weight transfer is good for getting the buggy into the track. However, one of the things that I found in testing is, if you have too fast of rear to front weight transfer like this, it makes it really hard to enter a corner consistently because all the rear tires being essentially unloaded off the dirt. Adding rear droop does help, but you still have to consider that, and how you actually can, an easy way to control the rear weight transfer without giving up the side-to-side roll and side-to-side weight transfer in the rear would be increasing your shock fluid weight and viscosity in the rear. So that's what I have done. So I usually run anywhere from a 25 to 50 CST split, where the front would be 25 to 50 CST higher than the rear. As far as spring preference goes, I actually like both the Mugen 1-dot springs, both front and rear, as well as I like the Team Associated 13 millimeter green springs in the rear, the 61 millimeters, and then the 44 millimeter white springs in the front. So I think it really just depends. The Mugen 1-dot springs are going to be a little bit softer, so if you have a very soft surface, maybe that's a spring you'd want to consider. As I had mentioned before, droop is super critical for traction with 2wd Buggy on low grip dirt, so you want to run a lot of droop. So to get that, you can run the longer shock eyelets. These are the +2 shock eyelets, as well as you can use external spacers. And essentially, whenever you have the shock fully compressed before you put oil in it, you'll match it up so the top of the shock piston is flush with the top of the shock body, and that essentially ensures that you have the maximized amount of droop that's available, or shock stroke that's available to you. So I like to usually run 1 to 2 millimeters of external spacers on my shocks, as well as I use the +2 shock eyelets. So I recommend doing that. As far as shock oils go, it really greatly depends on the track conditions, if it's bumpy or not, as well as the ambient temperature. But let's say for 80-degree Fahrenheit ambient temperature on a slightly bumpy, slightly smooth outdoor dirt surface, I'd say you start with usually 450 in the front, maybe 425 CST in the rear would be like a baseline starting point. And these 2wd Buggies, they don't weigh a lot of really sensitive temperature changes, so you have to make sure that you are adjusting your shock oil viscosity with the ambient temperature. As far as shock pistons go, I think that this is definitely comes down to personal preference. For me personally, what I like is the 2mm thick pistons. I think they're a little bit more reactive, and they're willing to change directions a little quicker. They don't pack up as easy as like a 2.5mm thick piston. I typically like to run the 2-hole pistons in the front and then 3-hole pistons in the rear. They're usually the 2mm thick, 2-hole by 1.7mm diameter holes in the front, and in the rear be 2-hole that are 1.8mm each, plus a 1.0mm third hole and 2mm thick pistons in the rear. I think that's a good baseline. You can also run 4-hole pistons to get your buggy into the track a little more. Just be aware it takes away some pack on the landings. So if you have bigger jumps, you may want to consider just the 2 or 3-hole pistons. But it really just depends on the layout and the driver preference. I do recommend trying both and see what you like. So another super critical adjustment to set up your 2wd Buggy for low grip dirt would be your toe in and anti-squat. So with toe in, I would always run at least +2 degrees of toe in. As far as where you could go all the way, which would be like +4 degrees of toe in over kit, but I would usually start at about +2. As far as anti-squat, I would start with +1 anti-squat. So essentially, the toe in is going to affect when you're on power. Basically, the buggy's going to want to push and it's going to want to drive straight. So if you're having trouble on power with fishtailing a little bit, you can try adding some rear toe in. That is a super useful adjustment. In addition, you want your pins to be narrow. So if your rear pins on the hinge pins are narrow, it essentially allows the buggy to roll more and get in the track more. So that's going to increase your side bite. Highly recommend doing that on low grip applications. Anti-squat will also help with your forward drive as well as your jumping capabilities. I usually start with +1 degree of anti-squat. You could run up to 2. So essentially what it does is the buggy will want to block up its ride height, and then it will force all of the opposing forces that are trying to get the buggy to straighten back up. It will then shove the tires into the dirt essentially. So it's really a geometry thing. So it really does have a very noticeable impact on your forward drive. In addition, I feel like it helps the buggy want to leap over the jumps. That bind, it kicks that rear end up. It also makes it so when you land, you have nose down when you're landing, even if you're running more of a rear weight bias. As far as the front toe in, I usually like to either run no toe in or maybe just a ½ degree of toe in. So this just helps with the tracking ability of the buggy. Remember that the rear end's never going to be 100% locked in, so you want something that's going to be predictable, stable, and easy to drive. So that's going to be either 0 or maybe a ½ degree toe in. As far as camber, I usually just stick to pretty much all the time. I'm going to be at -1 degrees of camber, both front and rear. So basically, the front and rear tires going to be angled in 1 degree front and rear. Next topic we're going to talk about is roll center. So typically, you want to have a low roll center for low traction tracks. That's kind of an easy way to think about it. High roll center for high traction, low center for low traction. Generally speaking, that doesn't always apply. I think a lot of it comes down to driver feel, and also the track conditions can change too. So this is a really good fine-tuning adjustment to try to get maximize performance out of your buggy setup. So generally speaking, on the rear, you want to use the inside ball stud mounts for the rear camber links. All right. You can also have less shims on your inside ball studs, and that'll basically, there's less support then for the rear end of the buggy, and it'll want to roll more, essentially. All right, the next thing we're going to cover is bump steer. So it's really important to adjust your bump steer correctly to your hub height that you're running in the front. So the idea is you don't want to have any bump steer. It makes the buggy unpredictable on low grip tracks. So I try to tune mine out as best I can based on the setup of the buggy. So with your hubs all the way down, generally speaking, you're going to run 2mm ball stud shims under the outer steering tie rod ball stud. So something to think about as a baseline. If you raise the hubs 1mm, then you'll run only 1mm there. So The idea is though, you don't want any bump steer, and what I mean by that is when I compress the suspension, that's the front tires wanting to turn in, or I guess turn out too. So I just want them to stay at a very consistent range as I'm cornering it and the buggy is leaning into the dirt as I make it through the corner. All right, something that goes without saying, if you're gonna run a low grip dirt, you're gonna wanna run a ball diff as well as a slipper clutch. Don't run a direct drive kit. So this is just gonna help with getting the buggy to hook up on the low traction tracks. Ball diff versus gear diff, you know, gear diff can work on hard packed clay, I think, just as good as a ball diff, but when it comes to like more of a loose dirt situation, then you're gonna run a ball diff. The ball diff, basically the reason that's better is it has consistent amount of force from when you first crack the diff loose when it starts to rotate. So if I hold the spur gear here, when I first start to rotate it, it feels the same amount of resistance even when I'm spinning it fast. I have the same amount of resistance. So it makes the buggy feel more predictable during cornering and under acceleration. Versus a gear diff, on the other hand, it's going to have a little bit more force when you initially crack it loose, and then once it starts spinning, then it's going to have less resistance basically. So that's good for rotation on high grip surfaces, typically speaking. Now Mugen Seiki does have a special oil-filled gear diff where it has different types of O-rings that you can put in there, like resistance friction O-rings, and I think that definitely helps that gear diff more mimic a ball diff, but it's still, you know, it's not exactly the same. I still feel like a ball diff works better on low grip dirt tracks. Now, as far as the slipper clutch, so slipper clutch setting I would start at would be 2 turns in from flush. One thing to note is whenever you are, pay attention to your slipper clutch condition of it. If your pads get smoothed over, or if they get too hot, it was too loose and you goosed it, that means, you know, you probably need to resurface your pads. So what you can do is actually disassemble, take out the pads, put them on a flat surface like a set of board or a piece of glass, use a flat razor blade and scrape them, or you can flip them over if you haven't used the other side, or you can just replace them altogether if they're super worn in. So it's super important that your slipper pads are in good shape though, or else the slipper clutch will not have a very wide range of adjustment. So, and that'll dramatically impact the amount of traction you have when you grab the throttle. All right, thanks for watching today. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I'll see you on the next episode where we're going to talk about electronics settings as well as motor setup. So until then, I'll see you on the next one.